Thank you so much to the Starburst team for having me. It's a really exciting topic, especially in the world of data that is both very technical, but also very business oriented. I think over the past year, nobody can argue with the need for agility and to recognize our own systems. And interestingly enough, it seems that when things tend to be going badly is when we tend to look at data more. And so people have been leaning in more now than ever. So we have a great panel lined up. If you can go to the next slide, I'll quickly introduce myself. For those who don't know me, Sean Zinsmeister, have the honor of moderating this great panel with a lot of smart people to share their insights. Prior to joining ThoughtSpot, I spent years in the world of data and analytics, including predictive analytics and AI. So this is very near and dear to my heart. But I am pleased to be joined with Daniel Abadi. You can go ahead and introduce yourself, representing the world of academia from the University of Maryland. Daniel?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Dan Abadi. I've been sort of doing research and transferring that research into industry for about 2 decades now, mostly in the field of scalable data systems and data warehousing. So I've kind of seen the industry sort of and the academic world also sort of transform over the past 2 decades and see advance. And personally, sort of really excited about the data mesh and what it sort of how it kind of brings a major paradigm shift in this area. So we'll talk about that more as we go on.
Wonderful. Also joining us on the panel is Gareth Stevenson from Bank of America. Definitely has a lot, very close to sort of the business understanding and operations, but he sees this firsthand. So really excited to get his perspective as well. Gareth, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yep. As Sean says, my name's Gareth. I work for Bank of America. The area I'm working in currently is trying to get a platform together for a lot of the risk analytics users so that we can try to make data more available to people more easily. So what we're trying to achieve, I guess, fits right in with Zhamak's view on data mesh. So looking forward to the chat.
Wonderful. Last but not least, I'm used to being a Z and being at the end, but I'm pleased to also welcome Zhamak Dehghani, who's going to kind of talk to us a little bit, not only about her great background, but also help us define the conversation as well, beginning with, what is data mesh? Why now? Why is it important? So Zhamak, I'll hand it over to you to kind of get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Sean, for the introduction. Excited to be here. So I'm the Director of Emerging Technologies at ThoughtWorks. That's my day job. My night job is just pushing the idea and the concept of data mesh forward across the industry. So I'm excited to be here and talking about it. So maybe we'll just start with to level the ground. We'll start with what is data mesh. So data mesh is a centralized approach to managing and accessing data for analytical use cases. Next slide, please. So why do we need yet another approach? We've had data lakes, data warehouse, and proliferation of tools for this, because we are, I think, at an inflection point in our journey, in our data journey, that we've got this, on one hand, this new great expectations of data, right? We started from kind of half a century ago with expectations around business intelligence, right? Getting reports, quarterly reports, getting a view of your business. But we've long moved away from that. And we not only use data for business intelligence and insights, but use it to how to design our products with machine learning models, how to design our services, to personalize the experience of our customers, to streamline the workforce and how we run our business. So with the, I guess, introduction and embedding ML into every part of our business and building products, our expectations have grown, right? And on one and the other hand, the other driver of arriving at this inflection point is the proliferation of sources. I mean, we've gone through the three kind of growth of data velocity. We've seen the data volume back in the early 2000s and the introduction of Hadoop. We saw the data velocity with the introduction of mobile and the streaming technologies that came along, and data variety with text and imaging and audio. But we're, I think, encountering of the scale of the fourth kind, which is data sources, where the data comes from, the origins of the data. Data can be anywhere, right? at the planet scale. You can most exciting machine learning models are developed when you actually correlate data from very distinct domains across the boundaries of organizations. So if we are at this inflection point, we need a different approach. We need an approach that removes the central blockers and the central bottlenecks in our architecture. And that's really the purpose of data mesh. So next slide, please. So to kind of decentralize access to data and yet be able to kind of get our arms around it and correlate it, data mesh has 4 principles. The very first principle is around kind of decomposition of the data and access to the data, and most importantly, ownership of the data based on the boundaries of domains, based on how the business decomposes itself, right? We've gone through this decomposition of complex domains, complex environments based on domains with the introduction of kind of microservices is kind of moving that evolution forward and bring it to the world of data. The second pillar is to answer the problems that may arise from decomposition of data and ownership of the data based on domains, based on organizations. And that is data siloing. So how do we approach data siloing? And data mesh introduces this concept of data as a product, as in moving our mindset from data as an asset to collect and hold and keep somewhere safe, to data as a product to share, and setting up incentive and accountability structure and also architectural components to be able to in fact do that, because data by itself is just bits and bytes on disk. So what do we need? What sort of execution context do we need to add to data so that it can have intrinsically those usability characteristics like SLOs, like good documentation and guarantees. The third pillar is really to address again yet another challenge that might arise from decomposition, decentralization, and that's the cost of actually running these data models or data products and owning them, the cost of infrastructure, the effort that needs to now every team to kind of put in place to have their data infrastructure. So introduction of a new data platform. So we've got a lot of utilities these days. We've got a ton of fantastic tools we can use. What's the next level of abstraction to make it really, really easy for generalist developers be able to use data, and analysts and data scientists to find the data now in this decentralized fashion? And the last pillar of it is, again, yet another problem that might arise, which is interoperability and be able to correlate and stitch data together, and yet, and also satisfy all of the the security, compliance, those cross-cutting concerns that we need to still pay attention to, that usually governance team pays attention to in a federated fashion. So federated computational governance tries to basically push policy enforcement as closest to the source of the data in a computational fashion, enabled by the self-serve infrastructure, and putting a governance model that is based on a federation, right? Federation of basically those domains and those owners of the data products. Last slide. So if you want to kind of visually, if you're a visual person like me, and if you want to put all of these pillars together, what does it look like? It kind of looks like this. You've got your operational plane, which is your microservices, your applications, the applications that run in your business, and your analytical plane, which constitutes of the data sets and data products that expose the temporal aggregate view of the data to the external world, data on the outside, that we can now run our queries, we can run our ML workloads on top of those, right? And bringing these two planes really closely, tightly together around the domain. So the same team is responsible for a microservice for a particular domain. They're responsible for the data products. They get enabled by a multi-plane kind of data platform and governed by this computational federated governance model. So in short, it's a paradigm shift in data management, more importantly for the use cases of the future for ML and analytics. And it's more, also it's an architectural shift as well as an organization. And of course, we need the technologies to support to enable it all.
Obviously, when it comes to data management, and we're talking about data mesh, the technology is at the heart, it's at the core. But I almost think it would be interesting to juxtapose this and look at the human aspect of this as well. What does it mean? We think about the main stewards of data being data analysts. So Gareth, I'm curious, in your take, what does this type of paradigm shift mean for the data analyst? How is it shaping their career? How should they be thinking about it in this particular wave of change? What do you think?
I think from my point of view, the benefit of thinking of data in this way allows data analysts to really focus down on what their likely training was. So their training was on actually doing maths on the data or thinking about how to present that data in a meaningful way. So if we allow this sort of abstraction layer between the data analyst and the data itself, where the data is left to live where it should live, and we can offer technology that enables that virtualization in a really meaningful way, it means that they can focus on the things that they actually care about, which is maths. They don't care about logins, and they don't care about the fact that data is stored over here or over there, and they need to know SQL and all the different flavors of SQL. They just care about making good business decisions with the data they've got. So I think going along with this this paradigm shift that Zhamak was talking about can help people really focus in on their own skills and allow people who understand how to serve data and govern data and stuff like that, allow them to do their job, which is enabling this sort of virtualization layer, I guess, is the way I see it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm actually really interested. Daniel, I wanted to take this question and flavor it slightly differently for you, because I think what's fascinating about the world of academia as it enters the business world as well as the world of analytics is that we see this as an important talent pipeline to fill in the future data users, the next generation of data users. How is this shaping that talent pipeline? What are you seeing that's shaping sort of some of the curriculum? How much technology is being influenced? Have you seen this type of shift start to shape how we're actually teaching the future generations of data users?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to disagree a little bit with what Gareth said to some degree. I mean, to me, the data mesh is not necessarily about sort of letting the experts take care of the hard stuff. So when it comes to data management, when it comes to some of the infrastructure questions, I'm not sure the data mesh allows people to sort of hand it off. In fact, actually, maybe the opposite, right? So it used to be that you'd have a team of highly paid employees in white coats, which would maintain the data warehouse and decide what goes in, or data lake for that matter as well, decide what goes in and what can come out of it. Now, really, I think one change that the data mesh is that really each team is more independent, and so to some degree, they need to actually have even maybe some more skills they didn't need to have. They had to have some sort of technology they're going to use to serve the data or decide how it should be served. And in since the data is their product, and it's their product, they're sort of maintaining this data product. They have to have a sense of how do I want to serve it? What's the right way? What's the right interface to the other users? Which of the different options my organization has to store it? Which one should I use for this particular data set? So I do think they need to have a little bit more training in that area. And so of course, that requires some amount of computer science, or at least. Sorry. Oh, I echo here. I'm hearing myself.
When we go off mute, we get an echo. So I think if we're not talking, we go on mute.
Anyway, so I was just, saying that I do think there is, I think, as an academic, I do think we need to be, as the data mesh takes off, we need to prepare students to be a little bit more independent in all facets of data management, not just, being a particular expert in a particular area, but also thinking about what's the right way to serve it and to make it into a full product that other teams can use.
Gareth, a chance for you to respond to Daniel, and then I'd love to get Zhamak's thoughts as well. But maybe if you get a chance to respond to Daniel.
Yeah, I think what Daniel said makes sense, especially when you consider that you use data, but you also create data. So you're a user and you're also a creator of data. So you need to then think about how you're going to store that data and make it available for other people, how you make your product available to other people. I think one of the problems that I see is that when you're trying to build a platform in the where I work, there's a lot of regulation about who can do what, who's allowed to touch what. So whilst in an ideal world, people would have more sort of overlapping skills and be able to do more overlapping things. There's almost always a requirement for separation of the person that can serve the data and the person that can do something with the data. But I do appreciate the point, sort of in, if what we're talking about here is trying to push towards something better, so we shouldn't be constrained by the way things work currently.
Yeah, and Zhamak, I wanted to bring your perspective in because something that this makes me think of is there's always a need for self-service with more data, but it does feel for a lot of data leaders I get a chance to talk to, it feels like the Wild West a little bit. Like they don't want to over-democratize things because too much access, but then we have, it's almost like self-service on well-governed data within our control. How do you sort of go about thinking? Those are a lot of variables to find that happy medium. So how do you go about squaring that?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and that's kind of the emphasis of the fourth pillar. I mean, in fact, when I first wrote the very first article, governance was kind of hidden somewhere in the data product standardization, and it wasn't its own pillar. And then as we went through kind of building it for our clients and going through the friction points and the challenges, realized that this actually needs to have its own pillar. And the way Data Mesh tries to balance that, and which I think is really how other distributed decentralized systems in our lifetime, like internet, have been built and been working, is through standardization of the seams, through standardization of interfaces, right? So you want to give autonomy to people where they have the most influence, where their sphere of influence and control. For example, for a data product, it's the data product developers and data product owners' responsibility to really model that data product as best as they can, based on their knowledge of the business, as close as possible to the truth of the business facts, right? Because they're right there, they're embedded in that business domain. But so you want to give that autonomy, but at the same time, there are aspects of modeling that needs to be standardized. So it's not Wild West that from the experience, again, this conversation is about an analyst. So from the experience of analysts, I still can have a homogeneous and consistent, delightful experience when I find different data products. I can still be able to join these things together, right? So I don't want to have this like fragmented, frictionful experience. But yet, from the provider side, we want to give them autonomy to move fast, to have control of their domain. So the governance piece is really around standardization of the pieces that matter, that provides that kind of seamless experience and interoperability. So I think standardization of protocols plus the autonomy of like internal modeling within the domains can kind of hopefully gets us to that equilibrium.
Yeah, there are so many points of friction that I think technology has helped us get over. And one really interesting point is that there are many people who believe, you have bottlenecks at the consumption layer. You have also bottlenecks at the actual warehousing layer, like where all this stuff goes in. Lots of different concepts here, but a lot of people have said, well, the cloud data warehouse has allowed us for the centralization of the data, which should help us relieve some of the adoption. However, it's really interesting, and Daniel, I want to tee you up. You've written in the past that the concept of the data warehouse is actually hypocritical, and I'd love for you to tell us why is that?
I would say both data warehouse and the data lake. So same type of idea, which is that at the end of the day, sort of the goal is to put everything, to make a central source of truth, right? So this is what we know as an organization, and there's some process in place to bring in data sets from different places to bring it into the central location that data consumers can use. And really, when I think of a data warehouse or a data lake, I sort of view two aspects of that enterprise. That's sort of the software piece of it, which is software that manages the storing of data and the serving of data, in addition to some peripheral tools like ETL and and some kind of consumer tools and integration tools and governance and security. So there's a bunch of software pieces to it, and then there's a human piece too, a business practices piece, which is sort of having the right team members in place to be able to manage this whole enterprise and to be able to figure out what should go in and what should come out of it and who should have access to it. And so I think what we've seen over time, in my 20 years of doing research in this field is that sort of from the computer science piece, the software piece, we've made a lot of progress in the last not just 20 years, really 40 years of progress. I mean, really, one of my advisors, David DeWitt, was writing about parallel database systems 40 years ago in the 80s. And what that can do and what that can open up as far as being able to increase the power and the scale of data analysis. And we've seen that really take off, especially the last couple of decades with some really amazing, great software products out there that are really doing a great job parallelizing data access. And it's critical. And the reason why you need to do that is because if you want to get scale, you have to make each entity doing analysis independent by itself. So if you have a bunch of machines which are storing data, which you're analyzing that data, then you have to have each machine be independent in order to be able to scale. Right? If you have some machine that's in charge of something that everybody has to talk to, that becomes a scalability bottleneck. And that just, as far as computer science, the research goes, almost all the papers that talk about making data warehouses software scale more has always been about getting rid of those central point bottlenecks, how everything as independent as possible. And so as a result, we've done a great job, in the software side of things. But the business practices is just way behind. It's just, until data mesh came along, they just you still have this ugly central thing that the organization all relies on. If there's one team which is maintaining that data warehouse, and there's another team that decides what goes in, and it's a central bottleneck of the organization, and it just totally nullifies all the progress that we made on the software side to make it scalable. So that's sort of why I call it hypocritical. I think we when you're talking about making things work, the software is great, and you have to have good software, but you have to also have a solution from the business side as well to make sure that there's no bottlenecks there either.
Yeah, let's talk about that downstream, because I think that there are cost structure savings that are certainly recognized on the IT side. I mean, that's at their core ethos is to try to be able to control savings. But Gareth, when you think about how this gets translated into business value downstream, the business users who end up wanting to take this data from wherever it resides, it's transformed from raw material into insights, and then they want to operationalize it. They want to make decisions on it. They want to take actions on it. How do you think about these types of paradigms and how it's kind of shaping the way that the business should be looking at ROI? What does that calculus look like to you?
Yeah, I think I just want to say one thing or add something to what Daniel said, because the concept of a data lake is something that goes round and round. And, I like what he said there, and I agree with it. But also then you look at the reality, and it's certainly my experience so far is that it's unattainable. Everyone wants, if your goal is data lake, everyone sets about spending a lot of money, spending a lot of time trying to move data, and it never gets there because there's always a new system being set up that doesn't have time to do X or Y. The data is just there. The crisis we've just been going through, there's a huge amount of data, really important data in finance industry that was just pouring in, but there was no time to get that into a data lake. It was just available in a spot and you had to use it. So I also question whether it's really a goal that could ever be attained. But then coming back to the question you asked me, I think it sort of links with what we were just talking about with data lake versus data mesh, that if you think about these things, the sort of more federated idea, if you have planned that into the way you operate in your business, it means that when that new data set comes in because of whatever the latest crisis is, and it's stuck on, or not stuck, I shouldn't say stuck, but it's on a SQL server over here in Virginia versus all of your other data, which is over there in Hadoop, it means you're already set up to deal with that challenge. You already know how to get that data pulled in. So it means that the people who are trying to use the data to make good decisions are already ready to do it. Obviously there'll be some challenges maybe to overcome with a particular new system, but I think it allows you to get to that decision more quickly if you're set up with this mindset. That would be my expectation of if you embrace something like this.
Zhamak, I'd love to get your experience. I mean, you talk to clients every single day about this. What are you hearing from them that aligns with actually both the views that we've heard on this particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, fatigue to start with. People have just gone through, data, they've been sold various versions of the data warehouse and then data lake and then go on the cloud. Like they're exhausted. I mean, I have a whole, all the empathy in the world for organizations who spend so much money and yet not getting results. So, they're anxious to buy yet another, even though they're looking for another silver bullet, but there is, some level of anxiety and sheer interest at the same time, right? That is this going to solve my problem? The two big pain points is kind of lack of agility. So we have spent all of this money and yet you have this long backlog of ambitious and audacious goals of being data-driven, but yet never get to the reality of it because it's just, we haven't set ourselves for a peer-to-peer model of operation that when I want a data, it's very easy that I can locate that data, get access to it automatically, of course, with the right permissions, and be able to use it. So the lack of agility is something that really companies are struggling with, and they're hoping that data mesh can solve that because we're removing those kind of manual and bottlenecks. And the other one is really integrity of the data. There's a lot of concern around, is this data actually valid? And we have this illusion that, once this data has gone through these weeks and months of cleansing and pipelines, pristine golden data, we stamp it as golden data. And guess what? We just mentioned businesses moved on. Those points of, applications that generated the data have long moved on. So we are making decisions based on the data that is not real time. And if it is real time, it's not correct because it doesn't have the data. The concept of data is lost and somewhat exists. So businesses are hoping that they're gaining the agility. They can really meet the goals that they had. And there's no lack of that. Like every CEO, CDO's strategy is just sprinkled with data-driven, ML-driven, product and service development. So they're hoping that this can really, truly democratize access to the data. Having said that, data mesh is not a silver bullet. I mean, if you think about the cycle of intelligence, getting access to the data at the right time, right where it is, in a trustworthy fashion, it's just the beginning, right, of the process. And then after that is building the models that don't have biases, deploying them or doing analysis, right, that is relevant. And so there's a whole, this cycle of intelligence from data to kind of intelligence embedded into what we do. We have a journey to go. And data mesh is just it's going to help us to finally bootstrap ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that there's so much to unpack there. And I think that one of the things that, I really love about the data and analytics world is that things change very quickly. There's an image in my brain from 2020 is going to always feel like the era of COVID, a topic that everyone's sick of, pun intended. But that massive curve that forced all of the businesses to change the way because consumer behavior was changing so very, very quickly. Businesses had to move to, if they weren't thinking about digital transformation before, they were pushed over the edge at that point. The other thing is not just the rapid change in technology, but it does make me think about, again, preparing this new generation of analytics and data users. There's just a word soup, a plethora of different things. Where do I start? Do I start with, and Daniel, this is where I would love, again, to get your perspective, where it's, I want to be, strengthen my data. If you're a business user, I want to strengthen my data expertise. Do I start by learning Python? Should I be moving more towards the data science piece? Should I be looking at modeling, auto ML? Like, what advice do you have for these fresh new minds that are coming into the world of academia or maybe coming from, into a master's program? Where should they be thinking? How should they be thinking about navigating their careers to be successful in this new era that we find ourselves in?
Yes, it's a good question, Sean, and great points. I get one advice I give students who ask me similar types of questions. If I want to be a data scientist, what do I do? I often advise them that really, at the end of the day, it's not a particular technology they should be learning. So it's not about learning Python or learning about SQL or particular types of stats tools that they need to know. That's all great. But at the end of the day, it's a certain type of mind, of analytical mind that you need to develop over time. And so, so you're taking classes that really sort of are very analytical classes. Even in English department or history department, that we go through an interesting subject and think about it in different ways, and go deep into what we see these words and what goes behind these words. What are the processes that that resulted in this output? That type of analytical thinking can be really transferred to data scientists. And some of the best data scientists I know do not necessarily have a computer science background. So I think the first step is to have a nice broad education, which you can get these days at most universities. And then when you're ready, then you go on to learning particular tools. And the tools are, it's good to know the tools as well. I mean, you can't avoid that, but I think it's secondary to having the right way of thinking.
Absolutely. What do they say? It's the blend of science and art, I think, that is where we're looking at. Gareth, you have a different perspective here. Your thoughts on this? Where are you seeing, let's call it the skills gap, potentially? Like, where should people be starting? And where do you see the skills gap as well?
Well, I mean, I don't think I do. I don't actually disagree. I think that I think having that analytical mind is the most important thing. The ability to learn some syntax, some SQL syntax, or some Python syntax, it doesn't matter. It's having that ability to think critically about what it is you're doing and to think logically. So there's lots of degree courses that will teach you that, and I think that's the most important thing that you can learn at university. I think topping that up with some evidence that you can actually live that out. So whether it doesn't matter whether it's MATLAB or C or R or anything. I mean, all of these things demonstrate your capability to think logically about a problem. It seems that the concept of, certainly, I guess whenever I was coming through university, the concept of parallel designing your programs in a parallel way was really important. But there again, tools are beginning to help so much there. You look at something like MATLAB, it's just abstracted away a lot of that concern. But if you want to really scale up, then you're looking at things like Spark. So there's just so much to learn. I don't think it's important to learn any one particular thing. It's more about evidence that you can learn it. And then people would be happy. Well, I mean, the team that I would be recruiting for would be happy to hire you. It doesn't matter what you know. It's more about the way you think and how you can demonstrate that ability to think.
Zhamak, I want to extend this question a little bit, because there's an important dichotomy that I think is also happening here too, is that sometimes, and maybe mistakenly so, we start to lump data professionals together into one role, which it can be very confusing. Now, this is something that we've chatted about in the past, which is I'm looking at my data career, or as a data professional. I can either go towards the data science part of it, but there's also this motion we talked about, things downstream, data analysts becoming more operationally minded. Are you seeing this type of shift, and what do you suggest for how people should be shaping that decision?
Yeah, I think that in my mind always there's a provider role and a consumer role, and then and you switch that role depending where you are. So at least from the data mesh, I guess the vision of the responsibilities and the landscape, you've got kind of pure infrastructure play that I don't think analysts get into pure infrastructure play. These are engineers that are, they spend their time provisioning data tooling and the data infrastructure so that the analysts and scientists can do their job and do it really, really fast and without friction. So some people who have come, and often we see people who've been doing infrastructure engineering, maybe on the computational world, kind of making their way to the data world. And on the consumer side of it, again, you've got kind of people that are more on the consumer of the infrastructure, provider of the data, or the consumers of the data, or both, right? So on the provider of the data, If you become, let's say you're part of an e-commerce team that builds the e-commerce application and now providing the e-commerce events as a data product for analysts to use, then you have to have a set of skill sets. You need to understand some of the complexities of managing data. Even though the new infrastructure will give you all the tools that you need, it will give you a Spark cluster, will give you a blueprint of a data product. So you just focus on the transformation code, but you need to have maybe a slightly know about functional programming, a slide of programming that lends itself to transformation of the data, serving of the data, understand the needs of your customers, like what do they actually care about, what do they want to see. A data analyst may not want to see an event stream. They may want to be able to run SQL queries, or a data scientist may not want to see necessarily an event stream. They want to do feature engineering, so they want to see a columnar file. So have an understanding of this multimodal access to the data, and the platform will enable you to that. And on the consumer side, like closer to the business, when you're really solving the business problems, again, you've got this spectrum of data scientists and data analysts, and I really don't want to create like different classes of roles. I think it's really a spectrum there, and the lines are quite fuzzy and blurring as well. As Daniel and Gareth said, I think this starts with kind of analytical mindset, and also this mindset that I think a lot of our programmers, people that are coming from logical programming, have, that the world is binary, right? It's either right or it's wrong. Or if I put this input through the process, I'm expecting this deterministic output. And in the analytical world and machine learning world, the world doesn't work then. The world is probabilistic, like everything possible within a range. And then over time, you try to refine that range to be closer to the truth, right? The truth of the answer. So learning those probabilistic modeling and learning how to map that to business and educating the business. Like a lot of our project managers or product managers, they don't like an answer that you would say, well, I think if you put this personalization in place, the conversion rate would be somewhere here. We're not quite sure, and we have to refine it. That doesn't go down really well because it's very much used to kind of logical programming of the world and deterministic model. So I think whether you're an analyst or scientist, you need to have that mindset and have that education. And then, you either fall on the more science part of it, which is that you're developing the exact model that is going to give the answer, or maybe more on the kind of the analyst end of the spectrum, which is creating the insights, the visualization, or these new roles that we've defined, which is engineering between the two, which I hope they go away, which is like, you tell me, analysts and scientists, tell me what to do and I'll code it for you. So I think that needs to go away. And I hope that everyone can have enough basic kind of programming skills. Software has eaten the world and it's eating the data. So basic programming skills to be able to kind of focus on matters, but also do it kind of right and apply some engineering practices. And I'm hoping that, with elevation and abstraction of the tooling, that requirement perhaps reduces, but it's still always going to be there.
Absolutely. So last question to round out. We talked a little bit about data products, data apps. It seems that every company is trying to figure out how to monetize their data, commercialize their data, extend data beyond the walls of their business to create new consumer experiences. I had a pleasure of talking with a high-level executive at one of the major retail banks that everybody knows. And they want to move to say, hey, we want to transform from a retail bank into a software company, right? You see this with a lot of the sports apparel companies too. Everything is, always on technology, where we're gathering more data than ever to build these experiences. So the future of data apps, where do you see, are data analysts set up to become the next great app builders of our time as everything becomes a data app? Daniel, maybe start with you and then we can go round robin to finish it off. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the key question is going to be, I think the real challenge that we're going to have to overcome is data integration, right? So in order to be able to make data really to a product, it has to be integratable with other data sets out there as well. And what this means is that there needs to be, some incentive in place and it could be a monetary incentive, right? But it has to be something that is motivating the data set generators, so the one who's sharing the data, to make sure that it is integrated with existing. It's following a similar type of protocol, a similar type of structure and schema as existing data sets. And so and as the data mesh takes off, and as it becomes, as data management becomes more decentralized, even within an organization as well, you have to incentivize appropriately to make sure that the data product producers are producing high quality integrated data. So, I think there's a lot of work that has to happen there. I don't think we're there yet from a software or from a just what's the right incentive supposed to be, but we do need to get there. I think it's going to be a good sort of area of research moving forward in academia as well.
Gareth, maybe over to you. I mean, you weren't the retail bank that I was referring to. I was referring to in my example, not to be coy, but funny. What about from your perspective? I mean, I'm sure certainly this is something that your organization is thinking about, both at how they can actually build more adoption, consumerization, self-service. A lot of those things. Like, how are you seeing the role of data apps play out in your workforce?
Yeah, I think it's true of every organization, and it's definitely true of finance institutions. I think they probably they were probably a bit slower off the mark to really use their data in a really serious way, but it's incredibly important that we do. And there's a huge amount of data available in order to make better decisions about risk, reward, benefits, and risk analysis in general. I think one thing that popped into my mind is that I think it's important that I actually misheard what you said. I thought you were going to say that data analysts were going to be the next big thing rather than data apps. But I think it's sort of similar that we don't want to make it seem that this is it's going to be the solution to everything, and these people are going to be our solution to everything, because I think a really important part of data mesh is respecting, although maybe you don't want to nail down exactly what everyone's exact role is, it's respecting that each person has an important part to play in delivering that app at the end, and that being a data analyst is great, but maybe you want to fill a role elsewhere. So whenever you're looking at an entire team and trying to motivate an entire team to get that app out there, it's not that we want to say that data analysts are the ones that just do all the work at the end, because data becomes so accessible to everybody. It becomes so accessible and so in this sort of data mesh concept because of all the work that other people do. Governance is just so important, and data lineage is so important. Like anything that we do, you have to know where that data is every step of the way. Otherwise, you could end up in some serious problem with your regulators. Yeah.
Mark, maybe your thoughts to kind of round us out as you started the conversation and on this line. Like, I'd love you to respond to Daniel and Gareth and add your own thoughts.
I love what Daniel says. He says something really profound and something really important. So I want to kind of double down on that one. Without interoperability, without standardization, none of this will work. We're going to end up with just like shoving data from one data product to another data product, and we're just going to keep copying stuff. We just keep collecting this stuff. Like the phrase that I keep using is that for data to be used at scale and to really empower what we have imagined so far and what we haven't imagined so far, we have to be able to connect the data, not so much collect the data. So to be able to connect it, and yes, to run this distributed kind of analytics over the data wherever it is, we need this kind of a standardization and integration and operability. And I think that would be also a nice way of enabling data liquidity, which you have referred to, right? Data marketplaces, we see them popping up everywhere. The same way that we had, API economy enabled through APIs and the standardization of basic internet protocols. We kind of need the same that for the next data economy. And we're long from it, like away from it. We have SQL-ish kind of standards, and we have like JDBC, where we're really missing some profound and important interoperability for running analytics workload on data wherever it is on a mesh. And I do agree that our next generation products are going to be data driven and data fueled, and the data itself could be a product as well.
Awesome. I want to thank everybody for their time today, and I hope everybody enjoyed the great conversation. I feel like we could probably talk for many more hours on end and go in lots of different directions. It's the beauty of the data analytics world.